I'm here with Bob Penfield. Bob Penfield is a legend in the auction business. He's a past president of the National Auctioneers Association and was in charge of the association when it had one of its most memorable conferences and shows. People are still talking about it, but it was decades and decades ago. They hosted it and had the conference and show in North Dakota, and everybody camped out. If you can't imagine that nowadays, because people get upset if it gets hot in Texas. But here we are at the 2015 conference and show. We're in Addison, Texas, and Bob has agreed to sit down with me and answer a few questions about the auction business. And the first thing that I would ask Bob, now Bob is also a Hall of Fame member and a past president. I forgot to mention the Hall of Fame. Very, very few people ever get that. Bob has been in the auction business for how long?
Today is my 67th year since the first auction I did by myself.
67th year. Okay, and how many conferences and shows have you been to, Bob?
I've been to 55 consecutive ones and 57 total. 57
total. Now, if you look back on your career in auctions, there's going to be a lot of information, I think, that somebody like you could hand down to younger generations if they take the time to talk to you and listen. I think that you have made some really important advances that you were responsible for and the first person to do, but I don't think unless people talk to you, they might not understand the significant role you played in the auction business. Can you tell us a couple of things that you feel like you were an innovator on, and tell us how you changed the business? Because I read your books and I know some of them are pretty phenomenal.
Well, my first conference that I went for, we used to call them conventions, and the first convention I went to was in Lansing, Michigan in 1957, and then the second one was in Buffalo, New York, and in Buffalo, New York I drove down to Lansing and drove back in my 59 Volkswagen, and let's see, it was 57 Volkswagen, I guess it was. And anyway, I flew down to New York and went to the convention at Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls area, and I could travel a lot cheaper if I didn't fly back until Monday, and so I stayed over until Monday, and I come back on. I got a couple $100 discount by not trying to fly back on Sunday or Monday, or Sunday I should say, and anyway they sat in the hotel lobby there at Buffalo, New York, and visited with a couple older auctioneers, and one of them was really surprised that the banks were still clerking the auctions out in this part of the country, and he said you need to go home and start your own auction service, and make it a complete service, and then you can get all the commission instead of just having split it with a banker. And so that was what I did, and so then instead of giving the banker half of my 6%, I was able to put it all in, not necessarily in my pocket, but to pay my people, and to pay I could keep a little bigger share of it myself, and so that was one of the ideas. But and then we also were the first people on the Northern Plains to use the number system. When my dad was a younger guy, he learned early on that he went to auction school in Kansas City, Missouri, at American Auction College, graduated in the class in January of 1936, and he sold his first little ranch at auction. It was an 800-acre ranch that belonged to Sandhill Pete, and old Pete come to town one day, and he asked Dad, he said, Earl, he said, I'd like to have you come out to my place and sell my livestock and sell my farm machinery and sell my sell all my household goods. And Dad said, well, you must have got your place sold, Pete. No, he said, I'm 3 years behind on my taxes. And maybe he said 2 years, I don't remember. But anyway, he was behind on his taxes, and he said, I'm just going to let, after another 2 or 3 years, the county will want to take it. He said, I'm just going to let them have it. He said, I'm tired of this drying out business. This was they'd had 3 or 4 years of no rain, not enough rain to even talk about. And so Dad said, well, he said, as long as the place had been listed with Vern Williams, who was a land locator in the area. And if you don't know what a land locator is, he's the guy that took you out if you had the northeast quarter of, if your homestead was supposed to be on northeast quarter of section 14 and range and township, why he could drive you right out to it because he knew where everything was, and he was naturally the guy that you'd. And this was before they had real estate broker's license, and so naturally he'd be the guy that would take you out to find your land when they got there in 1907 or 8 or 9 or 10 even. And anyway, he listed the place for $5 an acre, and old Pete had Vern Williams was that broker's name, and he said, Vern said he wanted him to list it again after the first year had come by, and he said, well, old Sandy old Pete said, why should I list it again? He said, in this year that it's already expired, he said, you never showed it to a single person that I know of, and he said, what makes you think that you'll have any better luck if I sign a listing? And old Vern Williams said, well, he said, Earl, he said, it's going to rain someday. And he said, I just think that I should have a year's extension on or another year's listing. So Pete did that, and another year passed then, and then when that listing went out, he went in to see Dad, and he said he was leaving. He said, I already got tickets bought for Moses Lake, Washington. They're finishing that big dam out there on the Columbia River, and he said, I think that at least there'll be irrigation water, and it won't dry out anyway. It might freeze out or something else, but it won't dry out. So Dad said, well, we're going to spend some of your money to advertise the horses and the cattle and the machinery anyway. He said, why don't we just spend a little more and put the farm on there, and the ranch. And there was no farmland on it. It was just enough to qualify for breaking it up, like 10 acres or something. And that's what you had to do to prove up your claim. And anyway, Dad, Pete said, well, he said, go ahead, Earl, if you want to. He said that as long as we're spending the money, we might just well do it. So Dad wrote up, included it in the ad, and they advertised it and put it in the paper a couple of times. And a lot of people, it was a beautiful spring day, early part of April, and even though it was way too dry, dust was blowing everywhere. But anyway, the weather couldn't have been much better, and they offered it all in one chunk, because there was no reason to split it up. It was only 800 acres to start with, so they offered it all in one place, and the fellow from Lemon came down there to buy it, and he came down to look at it, and there were several bidders on it, and Dad told him, he said, well, we might as well put it on the sale, we'll find out what the market is anyway. And Pete said, well, if it brings enough to clean up the taxes, he said, just don't even think twice about it, just sell it. Because he said, I'm ready to leave right now. In my own mind, I'm already in Washington. So Dad, they put her on the poster, and it turned out to be a really nice day, the early part of April, and a lot of people showed up probably to see what the market was, or what a land auction looked like, and it brought $7.25 an acre, and it had been listed for 2 years at $5 an acre. And of course, it was a year and a half yet after that before it ever started to rain. So it was and that put Dad in the land selling business. And we had 10 or 15 land auctions a year, every year after that, until up after the war, and a lot of times they were just estates or 80-acre chunk that was in somebody's road and needed to get moved anyway. But another idea that we brought back from Buffalo, New York was I was visiting with a guy that later was inducted into the NAA Hall of Fame. His name was Meredith Derbyshire. And old Derbyshire, he really laughed when I told him that we give the banks half of our commission to clerk the sale. He said, that we did the same thing here years ago, but he said we haven't for many decades now. He said auctioneer takes the whole 6% and divides it among his help. So I brought the number idea back then to, or complete auction service idea back to home with me, and Dad and Mom didn't go to New York, although they went to many of the auctions that we did, and so anyway, that kind of proved that, and then we were able to hire better help and more of it, and we did. That number system and the complete auction service got us into doing a little better job of promoting things and making it work.
Weren't you one of the first auctioneers to actually implement a new technology called a telephone?
Well, yes and no. We had telephones, but they were the old crank phones and that hang on the wall. Crank, you use them if you rang, just kept ringing. It made about 6 turns on it. That meant everybody on the line. These are all country lines, and some of those lines were run down a fence post, run down well, most of them hung up in the airways, but some of them were just hooked onto a wire, barbed wire. That's the way it went too, but they had to have, unless they were on wooden posts, where they had to have some insulation, and the wooden posts would insulate them. But at any rate, the telephones were a relatively common thing before but we didn't, we actually did not use them as much of a means of, except to communicate with somebody that was wanting to do some business with.
Say you had, I don't know, one of your grandkids came up to you and said they wanted to go in the auction business. What advice would you give to them now? What if you were going to tell them 2 things about the auction business that they really ought to do, what would those 2 things be?
Well, I think the first thing I'd tell them is that they, when they told a man something, a man or a lady something, no matter how bad it hurt, you had to go through with it. You just absolutely never broke a promise. If you promised a guy you'd be out there on a Friday, you better be there. Or if you promised him he's going to pay 10 cents a pound for his calves or old cows or whatever, well, you better do it. But you never wanted to, you wanted to keep your word good, no matter how bad it hurt. If you realized afterwards that you'd made a mistake and you overspoke your limit of your bank account, it didn't make any difference. You better do it, no matter how much hide it took off, because that's one thing you had to do is keep your word good. And then you needed to also be sure that if you told somebody you was going to do something, no matter, like I always said that, I guess, no matter how bad it hurts, well, you better